Hello there. I hope you're doing okay wherever you are as the insane year of 2020 draws to a close. I've been travelling for most of the past 30 years, so when the world started to shut down international travel earlier this year, it came as a bit of a shock. And it ended up, 2020 was the year where I spent the most time in Australia in 3 decades. And it's also the longest I've been away from Vietnam in 3 decades. So there may have been less international travel in 2020, but I've still managed to squeeze in a bit of international travel and some domestic travel here in Australia. And I've also managed to squeeze in my own personal medical catastrophe in the same year that the world's been experiencing a medical catastrophe. So join me for this little look at 2020. I got back to Fremantle early in January. The coronavirus alarm bells were just starting to ring. But Australia was already in crisis. Unprecedented bushfires had killed, destroyed property and decimated wildlife. City dwellers weren't spared either. Toxic smoke blanketed Sydney, Melbourne and Canberra. But Australia's new fragile world felt distant in Fremantle. The closest I got to the bushfires was this benefit concert with the Waifs, San Cisco and John Butler. John Butler made sure we didn't forget why we were there.
Our eyes do sting and our ears do ring from the sirens and the smoke. While the skeptics live in AC bubbles, calling it all a hoax. And around the world keeps turning. Between the floods, the fires are burning. Waiting for some savior to come, I don't even know why. We're sick and tired of feeling so alone. Anxiety breaking our bones. We've been given these wings to fly, but we choose to die. Don't ask me why. Don't ask me why.
I decided to base myself in Fremantle back in 2018, and I've been a little infatuated with the place ever since. The live music scene being one of the many things that makes the lifestyle in Fremantle very appealing. My connection to Sydney is a little bit tenuous after 3 decades away, but in 2020 I've been forced to live here, and I'm very lucky that things worked out that way. I'm very lucky that by complete chance I was in Sydney in March as Australia started to close its internal borders and you had to kind of work out where you wanted to base yourself. But I really love Fremantle, and being able to choose between Sydney and Fremantle, well, they're incredibly different places, but I'm very fortunate to have 2 fabulous places to be able to choose between. Fremantle's an historic port city, and the port really helps to keep the place feeling real. The British settlement here dates back to the founding of the Swan River Colony during the first half of the 19th century. There's an impressive collection of late 19th and early 20th century architecture. And of course, this is Australia, so there are prisons. Two, in fact. This original prison, which is the oldest public building in Western Australia, and the main Fremantle prison, which is a World Heritage listed convict site and one of the most popular tourism destinations. I'm sitting here at Fremantle Port in Western Australia, and it feels like an appropriate place to have this conversation because ports have been places of transmission of illnesses or of diseases around the world for centuries. It's worth noting that travel is always a risky undertaking. It always has been and it always will be. In mid-February, I had to head back to Saigon to give some lectures. By then, the alarm about the coronavirus was building. Travellers began to cancel their plans. The impact began to hit our businesses in Saigon, the Old Compass Cafe and Old Compass Travel. 10 months later, those businesses are still on ice, but the Old Compass Cafe has struggled through, mostly thanks to my business partner, Zung. We've had life-saving support from the local community as well. I've been here for 3 or 4 days now, and I've got to say, it's actually feeling really good. I mean, obviously there's a lot of difficulty, a lot of businesses are under a lot of pressure. I decided to head from Saigon up to Hoi An. My standard Hoi An arrival plan is to make a beeline for a Kowlow stand. Kowlow is the traditional Hoi An noodle dish, and it is delicious. At this point, I was expecting COVID to be like SARS, that it would be over in a few months and travel would need a big push. I'd been working in travel in Vietnam during SARS, and I remember the rapid bounce back that followed the all clear to travel. I wonder what will happen this time, whenever the all clear comes. 12 months after the first reports trickled out of Wuhan, infections and deaths worldwide are peaking. But if you'd made the choice to spend the pandemic in Vietnam, you made a good choice. Australia and Vietnam, the two countries where I live and work, have escaped the worst of the COVID crisis. Okay, D-Day. The fact that Vietnam and this region seem still to have avoided the worst outbreak scenarios that we've seen elsewhere has to raise a question that I'm still waiting for someone who knows more about these things to help us to understand. Vietnam's early success in containing outbreaks of the coronavirus has continued throughout the year. That success has been built on a combination of rapid and effective government responses and a population ready to make sacrifices for the greater good. Way back in February, Vietnamese people were already wearing masks. 10 months later, the country's done a better job than most, if not all, Western countries. Americans, Brits and Europeans stranded in Vietnam for the crisis realise their good fortune. While SARS' impact was mostly confined to Asia, COVID has hit the developed world. It's hit the world's richest countries. And it's hit the world's richest country especially hard. The reason I'm doing this latest update, which I'm actually doing from Byron Bay. I left Vietnam on the weekend and headed down to Byron Bay for a friend's wedding. Byron Bay is on the east coast. It's actually the easternmost point of Eastern Australia. So behind me there, you probably can't see it, is the Byron Bay Lighthouse. So things have changed in Vietnam. At the end of last week, following a flight, it's believed, from the UK, a whole... I love visiting Byron Bay, but it can feel like a bit of a victim of its own beauty if you're there at busy times. This is back in March, and right now these iconic beaches are facing terrible erosion. It's a problem facing beaches the world over, including in Vietnam, and it's only going to get worse as climate change plays havoc with the world's oceans. It's a reminder, like the bushfires, that even when the COVID threat passes, the planet is a long way from out of the woods. So I've headed out inland from Byron Bay in northern New South Wales in the rain this afternoon on a little family pilgrimage. This is the school my father taught at in the 1950s. And we came here as kids. He brought us here in the 1970s for a visit. So I think that would have been about 1976, I think. And so I thought it was well and truly time I came back. So this is the Upper Coopers Creek Public School, and it is in the most gorgeous setting you could imagine any school being in. And even in this rain, it's been an incredible drive to visit here as well. I didn't realise it at the time, but my trip to Byron would be my very last travels for about 9 months. I wasn't alone there, of course. The whole world pretty much stopped travelling. But I had another surprise ahead of me. The early part of the pandemic in March was kind of surreal from where I stood. I was reading a lot, writing, doing a bit of work, playing music, thinking, and really using it as a bit of time for reflection. Like a lot of people, I guess. I was swimming every day and keeping fit. It was like being in a health camp. And we felt kind of untouched by the pandemic. I'm on Sydney's Bondi Beach, and it's the 20th of March, 2020. And I guess the greatest sort of economic upheaval in my lifetime is just beginning. And here on this Friday afternoon, the beach is absolutely packed. We're in this sort of global health crisis, and I couldn't resist coming down here for a swim. Swimming across this bay is one of the real joys of being in Sydney, especially on a day like this. But you know, in my sort of meditative state as I was swimming, the awareness of what might be a political, economic meltdown is really quite profound. And I guess because I've lived in Vietnam for so long, concern about that country and about this country is very real. And
I don't know, it's hard to put any of it into words, but there's so much anticipation.
That packed day on Bondi Beach became a bit of a scandal in Sydney, and things started to shut down across the city from there. Bondi Beach was even closed for a few weeks. I was still able to get a daily swim in at the harbour until another matter intervened. It's been well over 3 months since I last posted a video. That wasn't my intention. I've had a fairly major interruption to normal proceedings. In early May I suffered a fairly major medical intervention that has really taken me out of the game until now. It almost took me out of the game completely. So I'm very excited, very pleased to be back by the ocean again. As a bit of a reminder of how things can change, I wanted to start by showing you a video I shot on the 4th of May. This delightful little spot in Sydney Harbour has been my go-to place during the coronavirus lockdown. Feel so fortunate, so privileged when you look at what's happening around the world. First of all, to be in a country that's been fortunate enough to manage and contain this terrible illness, and to also be in a place where you can still have this kind of public space available. And about 10 hours later, I found myself on my deathbed at Royal Prince Alfred Hospital in Sydney. They discovered I had something called an aortic dissection. It's a very deadly condition. It's a tear in the aorta, and the aorta is the main artery from the heart that supplies blood. The chances of not surviving are rather high. I had a 10-hour operation which saved my life, and I then spent about 15 days in intensive care. I had a stroke which paralysed my left side, which happily has all resolved itself, and I'm in good shape now and regaining my strength. The kindness I received in hospital was really quite remarkable and unforgettable. But of course, it wasn't only from hospital staff that I received incredible kindness. I also received incredible kindness from family and friends. I was just getting incredible comfort from the human hand. I wanted to hold everybody's hand, and I think some of my friends were a bit alarmed at my need to hold their hands, but certainly my brother, sister, Joe, visitors found me needing to hold their hand, and I'm told by my sister that quite a few nurses in the ICU at RPA Hospital in Sydney also had to sort of suffer my need to hold hands. So thank you to those people, thank you to everybody that held my hand during that time. By September, I was recovering well, settled back into my place, and ready to get back on the bike, back in the pool, and start exploring Sydney again. If there's been a positive impact of COVID, it's been people finding new interest in things in their immediate vicinity. Local cafes, restaurants, walking and cycling trails have thrived. Travel has been scaled back to the local neighbourhood. Spent a lot of the year in these cafes. Love this little corner of old terraces too. Thanks, man. So I made videos about my favourite swimming pools. It's a series that salutes the wonderful public-minded folk who built these pools before and after World War II. What a glorious spot for a dip. We've even got the Navy there in the background watching over us. I also spent time in Parramatta, not far from where I grew up, and lamented the failure of this booming centre of commerce to tell its heritage stories. Parramatta's history reaches well beyond the founding of the penal colony in 1788. But it's also home to some of Australia's most important colonial era historical sites. Many of them lie largely unknown and neglected, like the oldest European cemetery. It's kind of hard to believe that this is the oldest surviving European grave in Australia. But here we have buried Henry Dodd, and Dodd was a pretty significant character in the early years of the colony. And the old female factory. It's the largest and oldest surviving convict women's site in Australia. It's an impressive piece of history that is largely unknown, even among Sydneysiders. You can check out my Parramatta videos on YouTube. A little personal miracle of 2020 was that I was able to travel to Tasmania for the first time in November. My interest in travelling to Tassie was piqued as I read a lot of Australian history during the COVID lockdown. I'm at the end of 2 weeks of travelling in Tasmania. It's been my first time here, I'm a little ashamed to admit. And there have been a couple of other important milestones as well. It's been my first travels since COVID struck, and it's also been my first travels since I suffered something called an aortic dissection back in May that nearly took me out of the game. So I have a lot to be grateful for. Tasmania was a central part of the dispossession and cruelty of the British penal colony in Australia. It's an enlightening place to explore our complicated history. It's also home to many of Australia's most beautiful natural wonders. In recent years, Tassie's also become a centre for fine food and wine and the arts. This place, Mona, the Museum of Old and New Art, has given the whole state an infusion of cool. Coming towards the end of my first ever visit to Tasmania. It's been a wonderful, wonderful time. I've been here for a couple of weeks now. There's plenty I haven't seen, but this scene behind me right now, in a way, captures so much of my experience of Tasmania. It's breathtaking in its beauty. It's incredibly variable. It's raining over there, black clouds over there. It's been very, very windy up here just half an hour ago. And then the sun's shining over there as well. This is a beautiful, utterly spectacular place. I loved Tasmania, and I'm looking forward to getting back very soon. And I'll be posting more videos from Tasmania on Rusty Compass in the weeks ahead. Well, if you're still with me here, thank you for hanging around. You're very kind. Making this video has been quite a good process for me, because it sort of made me see that even though 2020 was the worst year of my life in terms of health, in terms of business, in terms of professional accomplishment, even with all that, there were lots of good moments and lots of sort of inspiring things about it as well. Like many of you, I sort of have a view of myself as a very independent person. And 2020 was the year that I was forced to accept the very deep dependence I have on others. My life was saved by the hands of a surgeon. That's a serious dependence. I spent 3 weeks in ICU where I was totally dependent on the medical professionals at Royal Prince Alfred Hospital. I also found myself dependent on my family and friends in a way that really has no precedent in my life. So I suppose 2020 has been the year of having to accept dependence, and in a way that's been a sort of global lesson as well. We've learned that we have a great dependence on one another. Thank God 2020 is over. I hope your year is ending well. It's a pretty tough time all over the world at the moment, and I have been spared, like all of us here in Australia and like my friends in Vietnam. We've been spared the worst of the COVID experience. So if you're dealing with that in whatever way, we're thinking of you. Best wishes for 2021. May it be a much, much better year for all of us. Thank you for your support, as always. Thank you for the messages that were sent this year. They were very, very important, very special. And be well.